Welcome to a new webinar. I'm really excited about sharing this information with you. Memorizing your lines, it can be really hard. And I know especially when you're first getting started, it can feel really daunting. People get really nervous. They have no idea how to go about doing that. So in today's webinar, I'm going to be teaching you 10 different ways to memorize lines. So let's get started here. So for the very first thing that I want to mention is before you even begin to memorize your lines, there are a couple things you want to keep in mind. First, you have to be in a relaxed atmosphere. It's really tough if there's a lot going on, there's a lot of noise. You want to just calm things down for yourself. At least that's what works well for me. And something that I just want to kind of mention at the very top is that everybody works differently. I mean, I know people who love to study while they have music on. I can't do that. If I have music on, I'm listening to the music and I can't memorize, I can't really think. So what you really want to do as I'm going through all of these steps is really pick and choose what is right for you. Maybe it's a combination of things. So for me, I like to be in a very relaxed, comfortable atmosphere. I like to be in a quiet place. I don't like things happening. I don't want TVs on in the background. I don't want to listen to phones ringing and things like that. I don't want to hear other people talking. I like to really just isolate myself. And the other thing too is you want to find whatever time of day, if you have that luxury. And look, sometimes you're working on a project and late at night you're sent a revision and you've got to get it memorized. So, you don't always, have the luxury of just being able to set up the time and atmosphere that's perfect for you. But in an ideal situation where maybe you have a day or a couple of days, or maybe even a week before you actually have to start shooting or auditioning, these are just some of the things you might want to do. So for me, I'm a morning person. I do much better early in the morning than late at night. Late at night, I'm tired and I'm just not thinking as clearly. So, but once again, everybody's time clock is a little bit different. But so find out what that time period that's really good for you, where you can really focus, and that's the time to start memorizing your lines. So here's just a couple other quick things before we get into the specific 10 ways to memorize your lines. This is just a little preparation. Read everything on the page. Read it very slowly. Read it like it's a grocery list. No acting whatsoever. You don't want to start getting into the habit of reading things in a certain pattern, in a certain way. You're not ready to really create this character yet and to start focusing in on what you're going to be doing for your read. So, like for instance, if these were the words in the sides, what I'm going to be auditioning with, this is how I would read it. Read everything on the page. That's how I'm doing it. No acting at all. Just read it through very carefully. Make sure that you understand all the words. Make sure that you can pronounce all the words. And, sometimes you don't have the luxury of being able to do this ahead of time, but just on a little bit of a side note, if there's a word you're not sure about, ask the casting director. And I know it's a little bit hard because we don't want to sound ignorant, but I can tell you, if you don't know what the word means, you're probably not going to use it correctly. And you absolutely need to learn how to pronounce words. And those are actually in one of the bonuses that you received. You're going to be able to go to a great website that will teach you how to pronounce words. Okay, here's the very first way to memorize your lines. What you can do is, and the reason why I'm mentioning this, once again, everybody's brain works differently. And for some people, when you do a physical action along with using your brain, it just sticks better. So if you write out all of your lines in one huge paragraph. And do that maybe 4 or 5 times. So you're looking at the words, you're writing them out, and don't just scribble, really write them out so you can clearly see them, you're hearing them in your head as you're writing them down. And then you take a little break where the other person's lines are said, and then you just keep writing your lines. And what you want to try is maybe the very last time, let's say after the 5th time, see if you can start writing these words down, even without looking at the script. And there's something about writing and memorizing lines that I find really helpful, even if you don't do this entire paragraph method, just writing them down. It can be really, really good. Here's another technique that you can try. You look at your first sentence and cover the last few letters of the last word of the first sentence. And then what you're going to do is go through it again and see if you can remember the last couple letters. Then go back, word. And then you're going to go back and try to cover the last few words. And you keep going through. It's kind of like working. And you can go through the entire script that way. And some people find that incredibly helpful. Here's another really interesting method, and also it does involve writing. And once again, I just find writing down lines really, really helpful to me. So the first thing you want to do is get an index card, or just that's probably the simplest way, or you can cut a regular piece of paper in half if you don't have any index. Write down your cue lines on the front, and that's the other person's lines. Then write your lines on the back. And then what you're going to do is look at the cue lines and see if you can say your line. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be studying and saying both the other person's lines and your lines. And all of a sudden, not only does that help you memorize your lines, but it will help you memorize your cue lines, which can be, it's something you absolutely want to be able to do as well. And here's another little trick. You don't want to get in the habit of only sitting in one place or standing in one place as you are learning your lines. Because what I found is that sometimes when I've done that, at least early on, all of a sudden I'm on a set and I'm used to, lying down and being in a chair, and now there's movement and I'm walking around and I'm saying my lines as I'm going from point A to point B. All of a sudden it has a very different feel to it. So what you want to do as you're memorizing and working on memorizing your lines, move around. Sit down and do it, stand up and do it, move to another area to do it. Sometimes being outside can be really helpful. Go back inside and do it, or even just walking and talking can be really helpful. And that way it just opens things up for you and you don't get stuck into doing things one specific way. Okay, here's another method that can be helpful. Especially if you're finding that there are just some words that just aren't coming to you. And that happens, it happens to everybody. There are just certain words that just don't seem to stick well. So what you can try to do is connect images with some key words. So like, for instance, if your first line is to be or not to be, well, on a sheet of paper, what you can do is place images of two bees at the beginning of the sentence. And all of a sudden you'll see, two bees, and then write down the remaining text. And what you'll find is that sometimes connecting things with actual images helps reinforce the words into your brain. Okay. So another way to go about doing things is read the entire Sizer script And once again, do it just like the way I had mentioned before. You're going to initially read it without any acting whatsoever, very slowly, really boring, word for word for word. Then what you're going to do is memorize one sentence at a time. Now, when I say sentence, I don't even necessarily mean an entire sentence from the first letter that's capitalized to a period or question mark. What I actually do is I might actually just consider whatever's on that first line a sentence, even though it might not be the full sentence. But you memorize one sentence at a time. And after that sentence is memorized, then you go to the second sentence. And you continue to do that throughout the script. And that way you're just taking small chunks, you're connecting them, pretty easily because you're going from one line to the other line. Or if you feel more adventurous and you feel more awake and you feel like you can do an entire sentence at a time, it's also going to depend on how long these sentences are. You might have one sentence that has, 4 words in it. I have an audition today and the entire sentence, it's 1 word. So, and I have about, 7 lines, and most of them contain 1 word. And then there's one that has about, 6 words in it. So it really, it's going to depend on how long the sentence actually is. But anyhow, just breaking it up into short chunks sometimes can be a lot easier for people. Here's another, and it's a little bit of a different way of doing things. And also one of the bonuses that you got gives you a link to an app that a number of people use. And what you're going to do is record the other person's lines. And you can do this on your cell phone. You can do this on an app if you want to download one, or even a laptop. It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't have to be high quality. You can even use an old tape recorder. It really doesn't matter. So you record the other person's lines and then leave a space while you're recording the lines so your lines can be said. And what you could always do is you're going to read the other person's lines, and you're looking at the script, and then in your head say your lines so that you have the right amount of space in there. And then what you're going to do is play it back. And you're going to hear the other person's lines, and then there's a gap. Start saying your lines. And if you need to, look at the sides. Look at your lines on the sheet of paper if you need to do that. And continue to play the lines back and then listen to them again. And then all of a sudden you're going to get to a point where you're going to hear the other person's lines. You'll be able to say your lines and you'll be completely off book. And one of the things that's really nice about doing that is that you are going to be really familiar with the other person's lines in there, because essentially they're almost going to be memorized. They don't have to be, but you're going to be very familiar with it. And that's just a really good way to reinforce you knowing exactly when you're going to be responding to somebody. Okay, now here's something, and I know this sounds a little bit unusual, but I tell you, I've done this for a variety of reasons. Sometimes, and this is singing your lines. And I know that sounds a little bit strange, but it's great. It's really, really good. And one of the reasons why I will do that, and I'll go to singing in a couple of different situations. Number one, I will start singing if there are words that are just really tough for me. And sometimes, especially if I'm doing, if I'm playing the role of a doctor and some of the terminology, it's just difficult. I don't really know why, but singing seems to make it easier. Or even if the words aren't necessarily super hard, but for some reason they just don't seem to flow well to me. They don't just roll off my tongue. It sounds weird, but look, this is what the writers put in there. This is what they're expecting me to say. And for some reason, singing it seems to be really helpful. Because if you think about it, in many ways, it really makes sense. There are a lot of songs that you can sing, you know all the words to. And it's not like you sat down and you tried to memorize it and you didn't write them down and you didn't, write the chorus or record the chorus in an app and played it and tried to think of the other word. You just listen to it, and all of a sudden you start singing it and you start getting all the words. So for whatever reason, that seems like a really effective way. And like I said, I typically don't start off that way, but if I am feeling stuck in any way, that is something that I will do. I'll start singing it. And just so you know, the melody, it makes no difference whatsoever. You can make up the melody. You can use the melody of a song that you already know. It really doesn't matter. But this can be a really, really good way to get lines, especially if you're struggling a little bit with the lines. Now, here's something. I tried this once. For me, it didn't work at all. I have spoken with some people who've done it, and they do find it helpful. And what they do is they record their lines. And once again, it can be on your cell phone. You can do it any way that you want. And as you're going to sleep, you start playing your lines. And you're falling asleep, you hear your lines in your head, and some people have said they have found that to be incredibly helpful. Now, I can tell you for me, if I'm trying to fall asleep and I'm hearing lines, it's going to have the opposite effect. It's just going to keep me up. So that's not good. I can tell you that typically the night before a shoot, before I go to bed, I might go over my lines once just to kind of do it and let myself know I got it. And then that lets me sleep better. But if something you want to try, maybe it will work for you. Like I said, it just doesn't do me any good. So here's something else that you can do. And I've done this quite a few times. It's, once again, this is one I just kind of created on my own. I've spoken with a bunch of people, taken workshops, listened to what other people say, and I've kind of combined a bunch of different methods. And like I said earlier, sometimes I use different methods depending on the situation. So here's what you can do. Highlight all of your lines. Typically, I would do that anyway, just to easily separate my lines from other people's lines. And then what I do is I count all of my lines. And once again, what I do is these are lines, not sentences. So in one sentence, I might have 4 lines. And I just go to the end of the page. That's line 1. The next line is line 2, then line 3. And then what I do is I figure out how many days do I have before the shoot. So let's say, just to make things a little bit easy, there are 10 days before the shoot. What I like to do is make sure that I am having this game plan here where I will have everything memorized 3 days before the shoot. I don't want to have things memorized landing on the day of the shoot. And the reason why I choose 3 days, like you can pick 4 days if you want, whatever is better for you. So that way, if for some reason something happens one day, I'm out all day, I'm on another set or something else is going on, and I just don't get time to memorize everything that I want to memorize that day, it builds in a couple of safe days for me. And that's just how I like to do it. So highlighted all my lines, counted up all my lines, and I know how many days I have before the shoot, and I want to have everything memorized 3 days prior to the shoot. And then what I do is I divide the number of days that I have to memorize the lines by the amount of lines that I have. So let me just make this really simple. So let's say if I have 10 days to memorize things, the shoot is going to be happening 13 days from now, and I've got 80 lines. Then that means I've got to memorize 8 lines a day. Once again, that's not necessarily sentences, it's 8 lines. Sometimes if I feel like, okay, well, I've gotten through 8 lines, but I think I can do a few more, then I'll do a few more, whatever it is. So now I know a very specific amount of lines I've got to memorize every day. And then after I do, once again, let's say it's like 8 lines that I finished it today, and tomorrow, then what I'm going to do is I am going to start at the very beginning. And I'm going to go through those first 8 lines, and I'm probably going to struggle a little bit. I might not have them all. And by the way, once again, on a little bit of a side note, I don't memorize things super quickly. I know some people who have it's almost photographic memory. They can just look at the sides or the script, and they've got it memorized. For me, it just doesn't work that way. And ultimately, it really doesn't matter. I mean, you're always given some notice. And if I have to, really cram it, I will, but I like to take my time with it. So that's why I like to organize it this way. So the second day, I've already got my first 8 lines memorized, but I go back, do the first 8 lines. Once I have those done, then I start on the next 8 lines. And then, so actually I've gotten through 16 lines after the second day. And then the next day, I'm going to go back and I'm going to start from the very beginning again. And hopefully those first 8 now are going to go a little bit more smoothly. And then the second 8, it's going to be a little bit rough, but I'm going to get through it. Then I will memorize the next 8. And what you're going to find is that as you memorize more and more lines, every day it's going to take you longer and longer and longer because you're going back to the very beginning. But I just find that to be really helpful. And something else on a little bit of a side note, I find that sometimes once I have my lines down pretty well, sometimes I like to do speed reads and just zip through them. And that really helps reinforce what I know, where I'm getting stuck. And if you can start going through them really quickly, it just helps relax you, and it just helps inform you and let you know, yeah, you really got these lines down well. So like I was saying, as you do these, every day, each day it's going to take longer and longer, but to me, it's just a great way to do it. I like organization. I like to know how much I need to do every day. And so for me, that's a great method. After your lines are memorized, always try to read your lines with somebody else. It's one thing when you are, recording the other lines, but there's something very different when you're actually reading to a human. It doesn't have to be an actor. You can just get anybody and give them the sides and, show them which lines they're going to be reading. Actually, if you've highlighted your lines, everything that's not highlighted, they're going to be reading. And you're going to find that you might get a little bit stuck at first because it's very different when you're actually talking to another human as opposed to just doing all this on your own. But it's essential that you do that before you show up on the set. And this also, depending on how you've gone about doing it, this will help you with the cue lines too. It will help let you know what you need to go back and study a little bit more, or if you're really feeling pretty comfortable with it. So those are the 10 methods. I can tell you that sometimes for some people, memorizing lines can be tough. And look, you don't have to use one particular method. Use a combination of things. Just use what is ever that's best for you, and test out a bunch of these, because you're not going to know what works best unless you really try it. And the other thing too is, if you don't have a script that you're working on right now, just practice. Grab a newspaper, grab a magazine, and practice memorizing the lines, because you want to really stay in practice with that. You don't want to lose those chops. It's easy to all of a sudden stop being able to do that pretty quickly, but that will really keep your skills up really high, and so that way, when you do get an audition, you'll be ready. The very last thing before I wind things up here is, I just wanted to mention, because people have asked me this a lot, do I need to memorize my lines for an audition? And I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about that, because I think it's really important. In general, there is no one right answer, although sometimes there are. The exception is, like, for instance, every time I auditioned for the Netflix show House of Cards, I was told it had to be memorized. They did not want you looking at sides at all. So sometimes there are some shows, or there might be some casting directors who will specifically say everything must be memorized for the audition. And if that's the case, which I'm not all that thrilled about, but if that's the case, then you've got to follow their wishes. If they don't ask, then don't require, then there are two different philosophies. And I'll tell you both, and I'll tell you what I do. Some people will tell you, absolutely always memorize your lines. If you're giving your lines a day ahead of time for the audition, always have it memorized. You're going to read better, you're going to look better, you're going to look more professional. And I understand that. There's also another philosophy where people will say, don't memorize the lines. Be very familiar with it, and like, memorize what you can, but always have your sides with you, and refer to them periodically. Just if it's just a quick glance like that, and you come back. And their reasoning is because if everything is memorized, people are going to think, all right, this is the best it's going to be. You're ready. Well, if it's not memorized, or partially memorized, but you're still glancing at the sides periodically, then people might be thinking, this was phenomenal. And imagine how great it's going to be once the person's off book. Once they've had time to really memorize it and do even more with it. So that's the way that I go about doing it. If I can memorize it, I will. I always still have the sides with me. So that way, in the middle of an audition, if I feel like I'm forgetting something, I don't have to just stop. I can just quickly glance and then keep going with it. It just sounds so much more conversational that way. It makes things more fluid, and that way, like I said, if I do have it memorized, great. But I always have the sides there just in case. So for every audition that I go on, I do try to memorize it. I'll do the best I can, but I don't feel like I need to, only because we're not getting hired because we memorized it for an audition. People understand, you got the sides, you're auditioning, it will be memorized by the time you have to actually shoot. So anyhow, I just wanted to share that with you. And that's a philosophy that I've always used. So anyhow, this was great. I loved sharing this information with you. I know you're going to find this incredibly helpful. We're going to be having another great online video next month. Can't wait to share that with you as well. Don't forget, You can always go to my website and learn more about my private mentoring sessions. And that's where I get a chance to work with people one-on-one online, and there are different programs that I offer. And also don't forget, go to my facebook.com/how to model page and like the page. And that way, every time I post information there, you will automatically receive it. Actually, at the bottom of the slide, you can see some of my contact information, and follow me on Twitter as well. So that way, whenever I'm tweeting out some information, whether it's about an audition, a job, just industry related information, you will be able to receive it. I'm Aaron Marcus, and I can't wait to talk with you again soon.